Carl, your book Under Pressure was published in 2008. How would you summarize the reaction to this book over the past 3 years?
Well, I guess I wrote the book because as a parent, I'd lost my bearings, I'd lost my confidence, and I wanted to regain it. And so I set out to write a book that would allow me personally to exhale, because it seems to me that today parents are so anxious and so worried and so fraught that we're all clenched with worry about our kids. And I wanted to be able to get out the other end of my book and just let out a sigh of relief. And it worked for me, and I found that right around the world, wherever people have read the book, the reaction seems to be the same, that people say, whew, it's okay, I'm doing all right, There's no such thing as a perfect parent, there's no such thing as a perfect child. Everybody has to find their own way to run their family and their own form of childhood that they want to give to their kids, and that's it, and it's sort of a simple, basic message, but one that gets lost in all the panic and the sound and fury today. And so the reaction has been a very upbeat one. Every time I open my inbox, I have an email from a parent somewhere or a teacher saying, thank goodness someone actually wrote this down in a book.
It's interesting. What led you, the parent, to become distraught?
Well, I guess I'm part of the same society that everyone else is. So we're all marinated in this culture of impatience, perfectionism, and a feeling that there is only one way to do things, that there is some universal magic formula for raising the perfect child. And I guess I just got caught up in all of that mad, headlong dash to the finish line. And my moment of truth came when I started, I went along to a PTA, parent-teacher meeting, and the art teacher told me that my son was a gifted young artist, And that word gifted nowadays for adults, for parents, is a bit like a red rag to a bull, it's like the Holy Grail. And I just came running home, and I did what a lot of 21st century parents would do in those circumstances. I hopped on Google, I started looking for an art tutor, an art course, an art camp, something to perfect this talent of my son's. And then I said to him, what do you think? I found you an art teacher. He's going to make you draw even better. And my son just looked at me like I was from outer space and said, what? I don't want that. I just want to draw. And that was one of those moments as a parent where you see yourself in sharp relief. And I suddenly realized that I had lost my bearings. And I had fallen into that hyper-parenting trap that's so easy to fall into in this overwrought, hyper-competitive age.
What age was your son when that happened?
He would have been, I suppose, about eight years old. So, hardly the next Picasso. But I think nowadays we get so wound up with expectations and pressures that we are always imagining our children as the next Wayne Gretzky, the next Picasso, the next Tiger Woods, or whatever it is. And, I fell into that as well.
So, do you practice what you preach then, is something a lot of people watching this might want to know.
Well, thankfully I do, because that's the worry, isn't it? That you write a book that sounds noble, wonderful, and relaxing on the page, but actually doesn't work in the real world. And thankfully, that's not the case with my book. At least in my case, I am living what I've written. And, for me, there's very clear before and after as a parent. As a parent before, I was worried, I was anxious. I felt like childhood was a race to, I don't know what, but I was engaged in it. And now I don't feel that way anymore. I'm not so worried about what other people are doing. I'm not so worried about what the alpha mom is up to the playground, what the alpha dad is doing at the soccer field. I realize that really what parenting comes down to is finding your own way, finding the right balance for your children. No one knows my kids better than I do. No one knows my family better than I or my wife do. And so I find now that my parenting is much more relaxed. That doesn't mean that I'm swinging in a hammock and never putting pressure on my children. Of course, children need to be pushed. They need discipline. They need a kick up the backside every once in a while. But I'm doing that now in the context of understanding that there's no magic bullet. There's no secret recipe floating out there in the ether that if I just worked harder, spent more money, and read more parenting manuals, I would find. That's not the way it is. Now I'm more inclined to look inwards into my family and say, now what's right for my son, my daughter, for our family at this moment, and which way do we want to go? What's happening with my neighbors or other parents and families at the school gate? And I have to say that as a family, we're very happy, and my kids are thriving. So it seems on the face of it, anyway, to be working.
What examples of activities can you give us that your children take part in, for example?
Sure. Well, my son is a huge football, well, over here in England, it's soccer fan. I mean, he is, like I used to be with hockey growing up, so he is constantly playing soccer in his bedroom, in the kitchen, and he's on a couple of soccer teams. So that's really the main thing he does. He also does one lesson a week of acoustic guitar, which is an instrument that he chose to play. I'm not quite sure why. I'm totally unmusical and I like the acoustic guitar, but it tested it for it, but there you go. And he's been doing that for a few years. So those are his two activities. My daughter plays, grass hockey.
Field hockey?
As close as you get to the real thing over here. And she does flamenco. She dances in a flamenco troupe. So they each have two activities, and those take up time. Sometimes bits of our weekend are consumed by going off to tournaments and so on. But not every moment of our lives is a race against the clock, which is so easy to fall into that groove. And I see around me a lot of friends who, you sign up for a ballet class, and a couple of years later you're touring across the country and it's 9 hours a week. And then not only are you doing the ballet, but you're adding volleyball and tennis and Kumon tutoring, and before you know it, if you want to have a play date with a friend, you're getting out a personal digital assistant or your iPhone and booking in a 10-minute slot 3 weeks from now. And thankfully we're not like that. We're quite unscheduled. My children are actually very jealous of their downtime, the time where they just play, make up their own entertainment, hang out, do their own stuff, and I like that. I feel that in our family we're pretty close to a balance that works for us between structured activities and just free time like we all used to have,
Yeah.
In the old days when we got kicked out of the house by our mom, and she said, "We'll see you back at lunch, or see you back at dinner."
It's such a slippery slope, though. I mean, it's such a fine line, isn't it, to, like you said, want your kids to reach their potential, knowing when to step in and say you can do better, but not being overbearing and not being, big brother or big parent or whatever you want to call it. Like, how do you go about addressing that in your own personal parenting style?
Well, I think a lot of it's a difficult thing to lay down in a mathematical formula. There's no algorithm for parenting. A lot of it is just what you feel in your heart and what you feel in your gut. Whether the lifestyle, the schedule that your family is living under, when it works, I think it. You're not exhausted. You and your children are enjoying things, and you don't feel like you're on a treadmill or some endless carousel where you're spinning round and round and round and never getting anywhere. And I think a lot of us have that sensation. And when you start to move towards something that's more like an equilibrium that works in the context of your family, I think you just feel that weight on the shoulders lift, and you begin to look forward to the weekends and the evenings and the afternoon rather than dread. And one small tip for working out whether an activity is sensible for a child or is right is just to watch the child. I mean, children at that younger ages especially are not necessarily out when they don't want to play hockey or they're tired of cello and they really don't want to carry. We've got to read between the lines and read the signals. So if your child is exhausted, falling asleep on the back seat of the car en route to activity, or dark circles under their eyes, or not talking about an extracurricular activity away from the activity, just only going along and going through the motions, I think that can be a sign that maybe that activity could be dropped, that it's not that they're doing it for the sake of doing it, or you're nudging them towards doing it because you think it's going to look good on their resume, rather than an activity that genuinely means something to them, that makes the fire in their belly roar. And that's what you want is activities. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's about finding the right activities that really light up your child, rather than just fill up his or her schedule with more and more. Because ultimately, when it comes to child rearing, as it does with so many other things, less is more.
You speak all over the world. The book has been out for 3 years, and then before that, In Praise of Slow back in 2004. So this message has been out there now for the last 7 odd years. Is there a story in particular that really struck you, that you heard or were witness to over those years, particularly pertaining to your message?
Yeah, gosh, that's a tough one. There's a long catalog of stories. Let me just think of one off the top of my head. I mean, one of the things that I find most hopeful and I suppose gratifying is that even in the hard-charging, frantic world of, say, China, modern, evolving China and India and so on, where everybody is just roaring forward, full speed ahead. You're already seeing people rethinking the approach to childhood. So, the Chinese education system or schools looking at ways to ease the pressure for kids or not have so many hours in the classroom or cut back on tutoring. And because of the West, we just have this monolithic view of the new China as being a place where kids are doing 29-hour days and, they're going to be graduating from school at the age of 10 and they'll be done at Harvard by 14. Well, that's just not what it is. Of course, these kids are on many of them are on a tremendously hard driving schedule. But I think already you're starting to see parents and schools sending a different message, a message that's very much in tune with the writing I do, which is that you can go too far and that maybe we have gone too far. And so it's okay to let some things go and to let children go, just to let them have that free, quiet, unstructured time to think, to daydream, to rest, and to be children.
Last question, and it's an interesting one because you just brought it up, but I would love to know what you think about the whole Tiger Mom, Amy Chua scenario.
Well, I think it's very revealing how much of a splash that book made, because of course it hit all the hot buttons of the moment. It tapped into in the West, our fears of this roaring tiger that is China, and it tapped into our fears as parents that we're not doing enough. And so that's a kind of perfect storm. And the way the book was sold, with her first kickoff column in the Wall Street Journal and a lot of publicity, made it out that this tiger recipe was the way forward, and that if you turned your children's childhood into a manic dash to the finish line, that was the way to go. That your children would thrive, you'd all be happy, and everybody would go to an Ivy League school, and it would all end happily ever after. But of course, once you get past the froth and the publicity drive and the headlines and so on, you dig into the book a little bit and you hear what she came back and said afterwards, once the first publicity push had happened. It was a much more nuanced message, and it seems that one of her children completely rebelled and in some ways fell apart under this hard-driving, slightly psycho regime. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a kind of happily ever after story. And it seemed to me that the whole thing became a bit of still carries on being a bit of a storm in a teacup. And also it seems to me odd that people should be so interested in hearing what one mother has to say about things. My understanding is that she's a law professor, she's very intelligent, she has 2 kids, she's been a mom, but she didn't really seem to do much research on any of the subjects. It was very much a memoir, and that's the way it was pitched. And those, a personal memoir, of course, it's part of the conversation, it adds to the debate, it gives texture and other dimensions to the whole conversation raging around childhood and parenting at the moment. And I welcome it at the table. Mm-hmm. But the idea that it would somehow be a panacea, because I think a lot of people bought that book thinking, maybe this is the magic bullet. Maybe this woman has stumbled on the secret recipe, the universal formula. I suspect that most of those readers were disappointed.
Finally, what are you working on, Carl? What's next for you?
I'm working on a book that looks at how we solve problems in every walk of life, from relationships in medicine to politics, economics, and everything in between, without falling into the quick fix. So, in a sense, it follows on from a lot of the stuff I've written before, moving away from this idea that faster is always better. So, I'm kind of trying to assemble a rival to the quick fix. I suppose it might be called the slow fix. The way I'm doing it is I'm traveling around the world looking at intriguing and inspiring and unusual examples of solutions to problems that we all have, but solutions that seem to be working. So I've been looking at the bus system in Bogota, a failed school and how it was turned around in Los Angeles. I'm going to be visiting coffee growers in Costa Rica. I went to see a state-of-the-art prison in Norway. So very much coming from lots of different angles, but I think it will be leading us towards a simple and central conclusion, which is that quick fixes, putting on a Band-Aid when what we really need is deep surgery, is not really going to help us, maybe in the short term, but certainly not in the medium and the long term. And goodness me, if we need long-term thinking, it's now.
Thank you so much for your time, Carl.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.